Welcome back to Ring of Fire Radio. I'm David Bender, in for both Pap and Bobby this week. You know, thanks to his involvement in Watergate, as well as his many policy failures, including Vietnam, Richard Nixon is regarded as one of the worst presidents in U.S. history. But to this day, we're still learning more information about Nixon's tenure in Washington that further damages his reputation. In fact, Lyndon Johnson, his predecessor, is now on record as accusing him of treason. I first learned about this story from my friend, the activist, the intellectual, the historian, David Crosby. David Crosby joins us now by telephone. David, you sent me this story about Richard Nixon, and it was based on a BBC documentary that has just come out. It is getting a huge amount of attention because it started with the LBJ tapes. What a lot of people don't remember is that Lyndon Johnson put that taping system in that brought down Richard Nixon in Watergate. And slowly the libraries of these presidents are releasing them. And 5 days before the election between Nixon and Humphrey, when the peace talks had been agreed to, the war was going to come to an end. North Vietnam was sitting down with South Vietnam. It was all done. Nixon secretly sent a message to the South Vietnamese saying, don't do it. Pull back. Don't give him this. I'll give you a better deal. And as we know, the war went on for another 6 years. And that was a blatant political action. 15,000 more Americans died. Lord knows how many more Vietnamese. And this was all on Richard Nixon. Lyndon Johnson on the tape calls it treason. What do you think?
I'm surprised that you're surprised.
Surprised I'm not, but now that we know, what do you think it means? What do we do with this information? Nixon's dead.
I think we have to learn just how desperate these guys are for power and how completely immoral they are. That's the real lesson here. That people for that kind of power will sell their mother down the river and put her in shackles first. They'll do anything, and you know their pontification about how they love their troops and let's support our troops and bring our boys home and blah blah blah. They don't give a damn.
Well, you know, David.
They don't care about those extra 15,000 people who died. They don't care about the 50,000 people who died in Vietnam. I mean, it's crushing. You know, we expect greed, we expect ignorance, we expect stupidity, we expect completely, disgusting behavior out of them, but you didn't think that they would do that. They would sacrifice human lives to that extent.
As you said, why was I surprised? I'm surprised only by the fact that it took us this long to learn what you understood at the time. And I want to make a point, and we're going to play this on the way out of this interview, but you and Neil Young sat down and wrote a song at the time of the shootings at Kent State, at the height of the protests of the Vietnam War.
Well, Neil wrote it. I was there.
Well, you were there, but you helped inspire it. You showed him that photograph, and in so doing, you mention Richard Nixon by name while he was president. Well, you called him out, and nobody did that.
No, that was not done.
That was not done. What was the response to actually calling your president, in essence, a criminal? I mean,
the truth was, at that point, people had realized so pretty much completely across the board, except for the inner circle of Republicans who supported him reluctantly because he had managed to snatch the power. pretty much everybody else in the country knew that he was, well, I cannot say, can I, on the air what he was. But no one came back on us for doing it at all. As a matter of fact, everyone very much supported it. Everyone said, yeah, call a spade a spade. There it is.
But you were ahead of your time. That was 2 years before he was reelected in a landslide. He took 49 states 2 years after you wrote that song. So not everybody. George McGovern.
Yeah, and there's the end of that story.
Well, a good and decent man, an honorable man.
A good and decent man who did not stand a chance.
Yeah. And we're talking with David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. David Crosby is known to you as a musician, but I know him as a man who really studies American history and who loves this country, loves the Constitution as much as he loves his family. And David, when I see a story like the one you sent me about a sitting president of the United States, or in fact, sitting president of the United States, not revealing knowledge about the man who was about to be his successor, committing treason.
Don't you think he was just protecting the system?
Well, here's what we've learned about why Lyndon Johnson did not. Now, remember, Lyndon Johnson went on television, it was 6 days before the election, to announce the peace talks. And then he got this information. Here's how he got it. And I hadn't, until you sent me the story, I hadn't researched it. J. Edgar Hoover, the lovely and popular J. Edgar Hoover, had illegally wiretapped the South Vietnamese embassy. And the reason we knew Nixon was sending messages to the South Vietnamese was through illegal wiretaps. Johnson was stymied. If he said, this is how I know Nixon is committing treason, I have to reveal that I have authorized Hoover to commit illegal wiretapping. Everybody was doing it.
Had he authorized Hoover? Or did Hoover just do it on his own?
One never knows about Hoover, but Hoover and Johnson were very close, and so in all likelihood, he knew that it was illegal. So he would have had to explain how it happened. And this is two criminals, basically, not giving up each other. And that's how that game was played out. And again, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, counting the Vietnamese, who we never counted, of course, because you remember those numbers. They were never revealed. It was U.S. casualties 2, Vietnamese, 500,000. But the truth is, we never saw the ramifications of those two men lying to the American people in 1968. Now we know.
10 soldiers and Nixon coming. We're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming. For dead in Ohio.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm David Bender, in for Pap and Bobby this week. I have the great David Crosby with me. We've been discussing the revelation that I learned from him. My politics and my history are informed by the people who actually do the reading and studying. And David, I know you read a lot about the history of this country, and you and I have had these conversations for a long time.
In this case, I just paid attention to the BBC, which is one of the few sources I trust.
And that's where I want to go with this. Here's the situation. You say that one has to understand that our elected officials are essentially amoral.
For the most part. Look, let's look at it historically just for a second.
Please.
Okay, we're trying to end this war. He's willing to let it go on in order to get this thing that he wants, which is the presidency, power. That war, there's a great deal of evidence that the war was started on a rigged deal, that the Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened.
It did never happen. That is now historical fact. That's been proven.
So, now, this is not the first time. There is a good deal of evidence that Roosevelt and Churchill knew that in America there was a great deal of isolationism at the beginning of the Second World War, and that we needed to be attacked in order to get into the war and then shift the focus over to Europe and save Europe. Now, how did we do that? Well,
there was something called Pearl Harbor.
They knew Pearl Harbor was coming. There are many, 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 many treatises that have been written saying Roosevelt knew. And the biggest evidence to support it is all the ships that we would fight the next war with were out of the harbor. Only the old, outmoded battleships, which we weren't going to use, were there. The carriers, on the other hand, were elsewhere.
And David, this goes back even way before World War II. This goes back to the Spanish-American War. Remember the Maine?
We sank it.
We sank our own ship.
Yeah, started the Spanish-American War. And, I mean, you could go back further and find it over and over again. This is not new behavior. It's just ruthless, utterly disgusting behavior.
And I want to come forward in time because some of the same people, all those people are dead, including all the people involved in this Nixon revelation. But some of the people who are still alive were the advisors to then candidate Ronald Reagan in 1980, when, as you remember, we'd had a year where the Iranians held our hostages in the embassy.
Perfect example.
And it is now, I don't know that there's yet been the smoking gun, but there is an enormous amount of evidence that suggests strongly that the Reagan campaign sent back-channel communication, same way Nixon did, to the Iranians saying, wait. It's very close. You'll get a much better deal with us when Carter is gone. And if you remember, I do, it burned into my memory that on the day Ronald Reagan was being sworn in for his first term, holding up his hand, there was a split screen, and those hostages were getting off the plane. It was theater. It was political theater where people's lives were at stake for an election.
Utterly ruthless.
Utterly ruthless, and many of those same people were the advisors, the Reagan people, and their successors, the people they trained, were the ones who became advisors to George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. Matter of fact, Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld go back to that era.
Yeah, and Dick Cheney would do that in a heartbeat. This is his kind of game. He would gladly have rigged one with the Russians if he thought we could have won it.
Now that he has a heart, he could do it in a heartbeat.
No, he doesn't. He's got a jelly bean in there with a pump in it.
Fair enough. We are talking with David Crosby, historian, constitutional authority, musician, and my friend. And I want to tell you something. If you are anywhere near the West Coast, you can see my friend not reading from the Declaration of Independence, but actually performing on stage with his friend Jeff Bridges and their band, The Abiders. This is March 28th. Thursday, March 28th, 8 o'clock in Santa Barbara. It's a benefit for the wonderful Lobero Theater in Santa Barbara, this historic theater, and you're doing something great to help preserve that theater. So
when I first played there?
When was that?
I was 17 years old. That makes it right after the Civil War.
It was welcoming home the troops, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think, did President Grant come to that?
He sent his regards.
He did. Again, you can go online to Lobero.com to get tickets.
No, let's not even bother.
I just want people to know about
this. I encourage everybody to go to the BBC, and I'm sure it's still up on their site.
It is.
Check it out. They are one of the few truly responsible news organizations left in the world, and it's pretty much irrefutable. This is not. We didn't think this up over our breakfast. This is real, and it's extremely disturbing in hindsight, and it tells you a lot about what to expect from our politicians. I happen to think we've got one now who wouldn't do that. But the next one might.
Well, that's the thing. All you can do is learn the lessons of history so you don't repeat them. And this is a point.
Ask yourself would Mitt Romney do this? Now that's a scary thought.
The answer is Mitt Romney would do anything.
Exactly.
He is unlike his father, actually, a man who decided that this war was wrong. And that's what cost him his chance at the Republican nomination. David, we could have this conversation and have for a lifetime, and we will continue to, my friend. We are out of time here on Ring of Fire. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing this important story because, again, history is politics, and it is how we learn to deal with the events that are in front of us right now. We have to look back in order to move forward. You've helped us do that. Thank you so much for joining us on Ring of Fire.
Take care of yourself, David.
You too, man.